The Westbrook Academy's 20-year reunion was exactly as pretentious as I expected. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway of the Grand Plaza Hotel, each one more expensive than the last. I deliberately parked my 10-year-old Toyota Camry between my cousin Sophia's Ferrari and my cousin Alexander's Bentley. The valet looked at my car with barely concealed disdain. Exactly the reaction I wanted. What no one knew was that I'd driven here from my private helipad, leaving my collection of supercars in the garage of my penthouse. Sometimes the best power play is letting people underestimate you. Oh my God, Evelyn still drives that thing? I heard Sophia's voice carry across the parking lot. She stood with Alexander and our other cousin Victoria, all three of them looking like they'd stepped out of a luxury magazine. I straightened my simple black dress, a custom Chanel piece that cost more than their cars combined, though it looked deliberately understated. The diamond studs in my ears were small, nothing like the flashy jewelry my cousins wore. The watching eyes of my former classmates missed the subtle tells of true wealth, seeing only what they expected to see, their favorite target still failing to measure up. "Evie, darling." Sophia air-kissed in my direction, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Still working at that little finance company?" I suppressed a smile. That little finance company was Eclipse Global, one of the largest private equity firms in the world. I'd built it from scratch while my cousins were busy spending their trust funds and running their parents' companies into the ground. "Still consulting," I replied quietly, using the cover story I'd maintained for years. Let them think I was a minor financial advisor. It made what was coming next so much sweeter. "You should talk to Alexander," Victoria chimed in, adjusting her obviously new engagement ring. "His company's looking for someone to manage their employee retirement accounts. That's what you do, right? Small-scale investments." Alexander smirked, straightening his custom suit. "We could probably find something entry-level. Family helps family, after all." If only they knew that Eclipse Global had been systematically acquiring shares in their companies through various shell corporations over the past 5 years. By tomorrow morning, I would own controlling interest in all 3 of their family businesses. "That's very kind," I murmured, checking my phone discreetly. The message from my assistant confirmed everything was in place. Merger documents prepared. Board members briefed. Press release ready for tomorrow. "Still using that old phone?" Sophia laughed, flashing her latest iPhone. "Some things never change, do they?" "Speaking of change," Alexander added, "did you hear about our latest expansion? We're merging 3 family companies into one conglomerate. Biggest deal of the year." I took a sip of champagne to hide my smile. They had no idea that their merger was actually a carefully orchestrated takeover. Their companies were drowning in debt that Eclipse Global had been quietly purchasing through offshore entities. "How exciting," I said softly, remembering all the family gatherings where they'd mocked my career choices. "Tell me more about this merger." Victoria preened. "It's quite complex. Business things you wouldn't understand. But essentially, we're combining our resources to become one of the largest corporations in the region. Of course, we'll need to restructure some things," Alexander added, his confidence wavering slightly. "Streamline operations." I knew what streamline meant. They were planning to lay off thousands of employees to cover their mounting losses. What they didn't know was that I'd already prepared positions for every worker they planned to cut, in companies I controlled. "Still living in that tiny apartment downtown?" Sophia changed the subject, always ready to highlight what she saw as my failures. "You know, if you joined the family business like we suggested, you could afford something better by now." I thought about my penthouse overlooking Central Park, my villa in the south of France, and the private island I'd bought last month. "The apartment suits me," I replied simply. The reunion moved into the hotel's grand ballroom, a sea of designer clothes and practiced smiles. My cousins held court at their table, broadcasting their success to anyone who would listen. I sat quietly at my assigned table, near the kitchen of course, and waited. My phone buzzed again. "Final contracts signed. Legal team confirms everything is ready. Should we proceed with the announcement?" I looked across the room at my cousins, remembering every snide comment, every dismissive gesture, every time they'd made sure I knew I wasn't good enough for their elite circle. "Not yet," I typed back. "Wait for my signal." Sometimes revenge isn't about immediate gratification. It's about waiting for the perfect moment to show people exactly who they've been underestimating. And that moment was coming very soon. The reunion dinner progressed exactly as I'd anticipated. My cousins dominated the conversation, their voices carrying across the ballroom as they detailed their latest successes to an increasingly bored audience. "The merger will revolutionize the industry," Alexander proclaimed, standing to give an impromptu speech. "Harrison Sterling Campbell Enterprises will be unprecedented in scale." I checked my watch discreetly. In exactly 12 hours, their precious merger would be revealed as a hostile takeover by Eclipse Global. But for now I sat quietly, letting them bask in their imagined triumph. "Of course," Sophia added loudly, glancing my way, "some people prefer to stay small. Play it safe. Right, Evelyn?" The table tittered with polite laughter. I took another sip of wine, a $10,000 bottle I'd had specially delivered, though I let them think it was the hotel's house selection. "Speaking of playing it safe," Victoria chimed in, "still driving that Camry, Evie? You know, Alexander's dealership could get you a nice lease. Something more appropriate for a Harrison. If only they knew about my garage full of limited edition supercars, or the private jet I'd flown in on this morning. But I'd learned long ago that true power doesn't need to announce itself." My phone vibrated. "Miss Harrison, urgent matter requiring attention. The boards are assembled for emergency meetings." "Excuse me," I said softly, standing up. "I need to take this call." "Probably a client's retirement account," Alexander stage whispered. "Small potatoes." I stepped into the elegant hallway, noting how my cousin's eyes followed me with barely concealed amusement. "Perfect. Put me through to all 3 boards," I instructed my assistant. "Speakerphone." Walking back into the ballroom, I positioned myself near my cousin's table. Right on cue, the hotel's giant screens, supposedly showing a slideshow of school memories, flickered to life with a different display. Eclipse Global's logo. "What's happening?" Sophia demanded, her perfect composure cracking slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," my assistant's voice came clearly through my phone's speaker, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "The documents are ready for Eclipse Global's acquisition of Harrison Industries, Sterling Corporation and Campbell Enterprises. Ms. Harrison, shall we proceed with the announcements?" The silence that fell over our section of the ballroom was absolute. "Ms. Harrison?" Alexander laughed nervously. "There must be some mistake." I smiled, finally letting my carefully maintained facade drop. "No mistake, cousin. Eclipse Global has acquired controlling interest in all 3 companies. The merger you've been planning? It's happening, just not the way you thought." Victoria's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. "But, you're just a financial advisor." "Actually," I replied, pulling up documents on my phone, "I'm the founder and CEO of Eclipse Global. While you were all busy mocking my small career, I was building one of the largest private equity firms in the world." "Impossible," Sophia whispered. "We would have known." "Would you?" I raised an eyebrow. "When was the last time any of you actually looked at who was buying your company shares? Who was purchasing your debt? Who was quietly acquiring every piece of leverage needed to take control?" The screens now displayed real-time stock tickers, showing the after-hours trading of their company's shares. All 3 stocks were plummeting as news of the takeover leaked to major investors. "The papers are ready," my assistant's voice reminded us. "Shall I proceed with the press release?" "You can't do this," Alexander stood up, his face flushed. "We're family." "Family." I laughed softly. "Like when you made me sit at the children's table at every holiday. When you told potential clients not to work with me because I was a small-time advisor. When you excluded me from family business meetings because I wouldn't understand complex dealings." Other reunion attendees were gathering now, phones out, recording the moment when the cousins who dominated every school event were finally facing someone more powerful than themselves. "What happens now?" Victoria asked, her voice barely a whisper. I smiled, thinking about the restructuring plans I'd prepared, plans that would strip them of their executive titles and inherited authority. "Now," I replied. "Now we discuss your performance reviews." The aftermath of my revelation unfolded like a perfectly choreographed symphony of chaos. The reunion's elegant ballroom transformed into ground zero of a corporate earthquake. with my cousins at its epicenter. I've prepared detailed assessments of your leadership, I continued, motioning to my assistant who had now entered the ballroom with 3 thick folders. Shall we discuss them here, or would you prefer somewhere more private? You can't just evaluate us, Sophia sputtered, her designer mascara starting to run. We're company presidents. I corrected, opening the first folder. Let's start with Harrison Industries under Alexander's leadership. Profits down 40% in 3 years. 2 failed expansions. And an interesting pattern of personal expenses charged to company accounts. Alexander's face went from red to white. Those expenses were approved by the board. A board that now reports to me, I reminded him. Just like you will, assuming you keep your position. Though given these numbers, that's not likely. Victoria tried to regain control of the situation. Surely we can work something out. We're family after all. Family. I projected a series of text messages onto the screens. Their private conversations mocking my career, my car, my life. Like these family discussions about my pathetic consulting work? The ballroom had gone silent, every former classmate watching the downfall of the elite cousins who'd lorded their success over everyone for decades. Sterling Corporation under Sophia's leadership, I continued, opening the second folder. 3 harassment lawsuits quietly settled. A failed merger that cost shareholders millions. And an interesting series of offshore accounts that our forensic accountants are very eager to examine. Sophia collapsed into her chair, her perfect poise finally breaking. Those accounts were Father's idea. And Campbell Enterprises, I turned to Victoria, has lost market share every quarter since you took over. Your only profitable division is one you acquired from a company that, coincidentally, was secretly owned by Eclipse Global. My phone buzzed continuously with messages from board members, lawyers, and business reporters. The story was leaking, and tomorrow's headlines would shake the financial world. But your little consulting business. Alexander tried one last time. Was a cover, I explained patiently. Every client you mocked me for working with, CEOs and board members of companies I was acquiring. Every small investment I managed, strategic purchases of your company shares. While you were broadcasting your success, I was quietly building an empire. I pulled up Eclipse Global's true organizational chart on the screens. Hundreds of companies, billions in assets, operations in 40 countries. My cousins stared at the display, finally seeing the scale of what I'd built while they were underestimating me. Your new contracts are in these folders, I continued, distributing more documents. You'll be retaining positions within your company's junior positions where you can learn how real business works. Your salaries will be adjusted to reflect your actual qualifications rather than your family names. Junior positions? Victoria gasped. But where will we live? Our homes, our cars. Were purchased with company funds, I finished. Funds that now belong to Eclipse Global. Don't worry, I've arranged for modest apartments near your new offices. The commute in your Camrys shouldn't be too long. Camrys? Sophia looked like she might faint. Like your old car? I smiled, pulling out my other set of car keys. Oh, this? My real car's in the private garage upstairs. The Bugatti Chiron seemed a bit flashy for a reunion. The next hour was a blur of activity. Lawyers arrived with more documents. Security teams began changing access codes and collecting company devices. My cousins watched helplessly as their empires crumbled around them. One more thing, I added, pulling up another document. The family estate. They froze. The 100-acre Harrison estate had been their symbol of superiority, the place where they'd hosted lavish parties and made sure I knew I wasn't good enough to attend. I bought it last month, I informed them. I'm turning it into a business incubator for entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds. People with talent and drive who just need someone to believe in them. Where will we live? Alexander whispered. Eclipse Global owns several apartment complexes, I replied. Standard units, nothing fancy. Your new salaries should cover the rent, though you might need to budget carefully. As the reality of their situation sank in, my cousins' reactions ranged from tears to threats to desperate bargaining. But I had one final revelation to share. The annual family Christmas gathering, I announced. It will continue as tradition, at my estate. Business attire required, of course. And yes, I smiled, Everyone will sit at the main table. No more children's section. Later that night, after the lawyers had gone and my cousins had departed in their soon-to-be repossessed cars, I stood in my private penthouse suite at the hotel, looking out over the city. My phone buzzed with messages. Alexander, please, we can work something out. Sophia, you can't do this to family. Victoria, what about our reputations? I thought about all the family gatherings where they'd made sure I knew my place. All the reunions where they'd flaunted their inherited success. All the times they'd told me I'd never understand real business. The next morning's headlines would tell a different story. Eclipse Global CEO reveals identity in spectacular triple takeover. Hidden billionaire. How Evelyn Harrison built an empire in secret. Family drama. The quiet cousin who bought it all. My assistant entered with the final reports. All security changes implemented. Board meetings scheduled for tomorrow. And your cousin's new employee orientations are set for Monday. Perfect, I replied, thinking about their first day as regular employees. No corner offices, no executive privileges, no special treatment. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't just taking control. It's teaching people the true meaning of earning their success. 1 week later, I sat in my real office. The top floor of Eclipse Global's headquarters. The view of Manhattan stretched out before me, my company's logo prominently displayed on several buildings that had once borne my cousins' names. Their first performance reviews sat on my desk. All three were struggling to adjust to actually working for a living, to being held accountable for their actions, to understanding what real business success looked like. My phone buzzed with a message from the family group chat. Alexander, about the Christmas gathering. Sophia, can we discuss dress code? Victoria, will there be assigned seating? I smiled, remembering all the times they'd excluded me from family events. All the times they'd made sure I knew I wasn't good enough for their circle. Yes, I replied. Dress code is business professional. Seating will be based on quarterly performance metrics. And please arrive in your company-provided vehicles.
The bank statement sat heavily in my hands as I watched Michael pack his expensive suits into a designer suitcase. $250,000 transferred out in one clean sweep. 15 years of our shared savings gone with just a few clicks on his phone. "You don't need to look so shocked, Sarah," he said, not even glancing my way as he folded another silk tie. "You had to know this was coming. A man of my caliber needs someone younger, more vibrant. You understand, right? My name is Sarah Mitchell, and at 42, I was watching my husband of 17 years pack up his life while explaining why his 26-year-old pregnant mistress deserved our savings more than I did. Of course, I replied softly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I completely understand." Michael finally turned to look at me, suspicion flickering across his face. He'd expected tears, screaming, maybe even physical violence. My calm acceptance clearly unnerved him. "Well, good," he said, straightening his collar in the mirror, a nervous habit he'd had since we first met. "Jessica and I will need that money for the baby. A fresh start." Jessica. His secretary. How cliché. What Michael didn't know was that I'd known about them for months. About the baby. About the apartment he'd secretly leased in her name. About all of it. I discovered the first clue 6 months ago while doing our taxes. A strange charge from a jewelry store I didn't recognize. The receipt, which I found in his desk drawer, was for a diamond tennis bracelet, not exactly the kind of gift you give your secretary for Administrative Professionals Day. That discovery led me down a rabbit hole of investigation. Credit card statements, phone records, bank transfers, each piece of evidence carefully documented and stored away. Not in our house, of course. No, everything was safely tucked away in my private office at the university where I taught forensic accounting. Yes, that's right. My husband, the brilliant investment banker, had been hiding his affair from a woman who taught others how to uncover financial fraud for a living. "I've arranged for the divorce papers to be delivered tomorrow," Michael continued, zipping up his suitcase. "My lawyer assures me it will be straightforward. Clean break, no messy emotions." I nodded, still clutching the bank statement. "Very efficient." He paused at the bedroom door, frowning slightly. "You're taking this, well, better than I expected." "What did you expect, Michael?" "I don't know. More? Resistance? You've always been so, he waved his hand vaguely, dependent. I had to bite back a laugh. Dependent? He actually believed that. Believed that the woman who put herself through graduate school while working 2 jobs, who'd built a respected career in academia, who'd been managing both our finances since day one, was dependent on him. But that was Michael. He saw what he wanted to see. And for years, I let him see exactly what I wanted him to see. Will you be staying with Jessica tonight? I asked, already knowing the answer. The tracker I placed on his car months ago would confirm it anyway. Yes, no point in dragging this out. He checked his Rolex, the one I'd given him for our 10th anniversary. I'll send movers for the rest of my things next week. As he walked out of our bedroom for the last time, I waited until I heard the front door close, his car start up, and the sound of tires on gravel fade away. Only then did I allow myself to smile. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to Jennifer, my lawyer. He took the bait. Time for phase 2. Jennifer's response was immediate. Everything's ready. He won't know what hit him. I walked to my home office, not the casual desk in the living room where I graded papers, but my real office, hidden behind a false wall in the basement. Michael had never known about this room. He'd never bothered to learn anything about the house's architecture or the renovations I'd managed while he was busy climbing the corporate ladder. The space was small but efficient, filled with computer monitors, filing cabinets, and most importantly, evidence. 6 months of careful documentation spread across multiple boards. Financial records, surveillance photos, recordings of conversations. A paper trail that would make any forensic accountant proud. But the real prize was on the central monitor, a series of bank transfers that Michael thought he'd hidden cleverly through a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts. Nearly $2 million siphoned from his investment clients over the past 3 years. What he didn't know was that every transfer, every account, every dirty dollar had been tracked, documented, and reported to the SEC. Anonymously, of course. The investigation was already underway. They were just waiting for one final piece of evidence. That $250,000 he just transferred from our joint account, it wasn't going to Jessica's account like he thought. Thanks to some careful manipulation of routing numbers, child's play for someone with my expertise, that money was about to trigger a series of transactions that would expose his entire operation. I sat down at my desk and began typing, activating the programs I prepared months ago. As lines of code scrolled across my screen, I thought about all the times Michael had patronizingly explained basic financial concepts to me at dinner parties. All the times he dismissed my career as cute or a nice hobby. My phone buzzed. Another text from Jennifer. SEC just got the alert. They're moving in tomorrow morning. Perfect timing. The divorce papers would be delivered right after the FBI finished their raid on his office. I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself a moment of satisfaction. Michael thought he was starting a new life with his young mistress and our savings. Instead, he was about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating your wife, especially when that wife specializes in following the money. The next morning, I sat in my university office, calmly grading papers while waiting for the show to begin. My students were struggling with the concept of digital forensic trails. Ironic, considering what was about to unfold across town. At precisely 9:47 a.m., my phone lit up with a news alert. FBI raids Premier Investment Group, CEO Michael Mitchell in custody. Right on schedule. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with texts and calls. I ignored most of them, but answered when Jennifer's name flashed across the screen. It's beautiful, she said, not bothering with hello. You should see him trying to explain why that $250,000 transfer led straight to his offshore accounts. He's completely unraveling. I switched my phone to speaker and pulled up the local news live stream on my computer. There was Michael being led out of his office in handcuffs, his perfectly pressed suit wrinkled, his carefully styled hair disheveled. The cameras caught his expression perfectly, a mix of confusion, anger, and dawning horror. Has he figured it out yet? I asked, watching him scan the crowd of reporters. Not yet, Jennifer replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. But he will when the divorce papers arrive in about 3 minutes. I timed everything carefully. The FBI raid would shake him, but the divorce papers, those would break him. Because unlike the simple, clean settlement he planned, these papers detailed every aspect of his fraud, his affair, and most importantly, his attempt to hide assets before filing for divorce. "How's Jessica taking the news?" I asked, though I already knew. My sources had confirmed she'd been watching the raid livestream too, from the comfort of the apartment Michael had rented for her. "Left the apartment 10 minutes ago with 3 suitcases and all the jewelry he bought her, including that tennis bracelet that started this whole thing." Jennifer paused. "Want to guess where she's going?" "Straight to her lawyer to make a deal with the FBI." "Bingo. Turns out she's been keeping her own records. Smart girl." I smiled, thinking about the anonymous email Jessica had received last week, detailing exactly what kind of evidence would be most valuable to federal prosecutors. Sometimes the best moves were the ones your opponent never saw coming. My office phone rang, the university president's office. No doubt they'd seen the news and wanted to discuss my position given the scandal. I let it go to voicemail. They'd soon learn that I'd already submitted my resignation, effective immediately. After all, I had other plans. "The divorce papers should have arrived," I said, checking my watch. "Any response?" Jennifer's laugh crackled through the speaker. "Oh yes. His lawyer just called me, practically hyperventilating. Apparently, Michael's demanding to know, and I quote, 'How the hell did she know all of this?'" I switched tabs on my browser, pulling up the offshore account I'd been monitoring. Just as I predicted, the $250,000 Michael had transferred yesterday had triggered a cascade of automatic transactions, each one exposing another layer of his fraud. By trying to hide our savings from me, he'd unknowingly provided the SEC with a roadmap to every illegal deal he'd ever made. "The FBI agent in charge wants to talk to you," Jennifer continued. "They're impressed with the documentation you provided. Said it's the most thorough evidence package they've ever received." "I'm sure they are," I replied, thinking of the hundreds of hours I'd spent tracking Michael's financial movements. "But I think I'll let them handle it from here. I have a flight to catch." Running away? Strategic retreat. I have a visiting professor position lined up at Oxford, been planning it for months. I glanced at my packed bags sitting by the door. Seemed like a good time for a change of scenery. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "He really had no idea, did he? About any of it? About who you really are?" "No," I said softly, remembering all the times Michael had dismissed my work, my intelligence, my capabilities. He saw what he wanted to see. A quiet, dependable wife who handled the household accounts and taught basic accounting to college students. He never bothered to learn what I actually taught. "Financial forensics and fraud detection," Jennifer said with a laugh. God, the irony. Speaking of which, I pulled up another window on my computer. His initial court appearance should be starting soon. Want to watch? Wouldn't miss it. But Sarah, what about the money? The $250,000 he took. I allowed myself a small smile. "Oh, that was never our money. That account was just for show, part of the trap. Our real savings," I glanced at my phone, checking another account balance, "are quite safe. And significantly larger." You really did think of everything. Had to. When you're married to a financial criminal, you learn to plan ahead. Oxford in autumn was exactly what I needed. The ancient stones, the quiet libraries, the distance from everything that had happened. I'd been here 3 months when the first email arrived from Jennifer. "Guilty on all counts," it read. 15 years minimum. Jessica turned state's evidence. Apparently she'd been documenting everything since the affair began. Smart girl, like you said, but not smart enough to realize she was just another pawn in his game. I sat in my new office, overlooking the college quad, and felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Not for Michael, he'd made his choices. But for the life I'd thought we had, the years I'd spent playing a role to catch him in his own trap. The second email came a week later, this one from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. They wanted to consult with me on other cases. My methods for tracking Michael's fraud had impressed them, particularly the way I'd used his own arrogance against him. "Your expertise would be invaluable," they wrote, "particularly in cases involving long-term financial deception." I declined politely. I had other plans. The media circus back home had finally died down. Michael's face was no longer splashed across the financial news, replaced by newer scandals, fresher frauds. But his case had become required reading in several forensic accounting programs, including my own. The Mitchell methodology, they called it. The art of letting your target think they're winning until it's too late. I was grading papers one evening when my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. Sarah? The voice was hesitant, changed. It's Jessica. I sat back in my chair, watching the sun set over the Oxford spires. Hello, Jessica. I was wondering if you'd call. How? She paused, gathering courage. How long did you know? About everything. From the beginning, I replied truthfully. The bracelet was sloppy of him. After that, it was just a matter of watching and waiting. She was quiet for a moment. The anonymous tip about what evidence to keep. That was you, wasn't it? You deserved a chance to protect yourself. He was using you just like he used everyone else. I lost the baby, she said suddenly. Not that there ever really was one. Just another lie to trap him. She laughed bitterly. I thought I was so clever, you know. The young secretary, seducing a wealthy boss. But you were the clever one. I thought about Michael, sitting in his prison cell, probably still trying to figure out exactly how his perfect plan had unraveled. We all have choices, Jessica. He made his. You made yours. I made mine. After I hung up, I opened my laptop and checked a specific account, one that Michael had never known about. The balance made me smile. While he'd been siphoning money from his clients, I'd been quietly building my own investment portfolio. Legitimately, carefully, successfully. The irony would have killed him. A knock at my office door interrupted my thoughts. It was Professor Harrison, head of the department. Sarah, sorry to disturb you, but I wanted to discuss your proposal for the new financial crimes curriculum. The board is very interested, especially given your unique perspective on the subject. I smiled, gathering my materials. The course I designed was comprehensive, covering everything from digital forensics to psychological profiling of white-collar criminals. Every case study was real, including one very personal example. You know, Harrison said as we walked to the meeting, some of the board members were concerned about your connection to the Mitchell case. Worried it might be too controversial. And what did you tell them? That they were missing the point entirely. Your experience doesn't compromise the course. It elevates it. You're not just teaching theory. You're teaching reality. The board meeting went exactly as I'd expected. My curriculum was approved unanimously. Starting next semester, I would be training a new generation of forensic accountants, teaching them not just to follow the money, but to understand the psychology behind financial crimes. That evening, I received one final email from Jennifer. She'd attached a photo, Michael's face on a new billboard outside the SEC headquarters in Washington. Financial FRAVD Steroids LIVs, it warned. Report serious spaces activity. I had to laugh at that. Michael had finally achieved the fame he always wanted, just not quite the way he planned. The next morning, I stood before my class, looking at the eager faces of future forensic accountants. On the screen behind me was the first slide of my presentation, The Art of Financial Deception, a case study. Today, we're going to learn about a man who thought he was smarter than everyone else. A man who believed that money could buy him anything, including immunity from consequences. But most importantly, we're going to learn about the fatal flaw that brings down most financial criminals: underestimating your opponent. As I launched into the lecture, I thought about that day in our bedroom, watching Michael pack his bags, so confident in his superiority. He'd never once considered that his quiet, dependable wife might be capable of bringing down his entire empire. That was his mistake, one of many. The students were riveted as I detailed the methodology, the careful documentation, the strategic patience required to expose long-term fraud. None of them knew they were learning from the architect of Michael's downfall. To them, I was just Professor Mitchell, an expert in financial forensics. And that's exactly how I wanted it. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't just about winning. It's about using your victory to prevent others from suffering the same fate. Every student I teach, every case I consult on, every fraud we uncover. That's my real legacy. Michael wanted to be remembered as a brilliant financier. Instead, he'll be remembered as a cautionary tale, a case study in hubris and deception. And me, I'm exactly who I've always been, just not who he thought I was. That's the final lesson I teach my students. The most dangerous opponent isn't the one who shows their hand. It's the one who waits patiently, watching, learning, and planning until the perfect moment to reveal the truth. Some call it justice. Some call it revenge. I call it forensic accounting. The boardroom felt smaller than usual as I watched Robert pace in front of his PowerPoint presentation, gesturing dramatically at graphs and projections. 10 years of working alongside him, and I'd never seen him quite so confident, so sure of his victory. As you can see, he continued, straightening his expensive tie, the company needs strong leadership. Traditional leadership. The kind that Alice, despite her efforts, simply can't provide. My name is Alice Chin, and at 35, I was watching my brother-in-law try to steal my family's company right out from under me. Chen Manufacturing had been my father's life's work, built from nothing into a $200 million business. He passed away 3 months ago, and apparently, Robert thought that made me vulnerable. I glanced around the boardroom, noting the expressions on each face. Most were carefully neutral, years of corporate politics teaching them to hide their thoughts. But a few, the older members who'd known my father, couldn't quite mask their discomfort with Robert's naked ambition. Furthermore, Robert pressed on, clicking to his next slide. The numbers don't lie. Since taking over as interim CEO, Alice has maintained the status quo at best. No innovation, no growth. Just riding on Dad's coattails. Dad, the way he said it made my teeth clench. Robert had married my sister Karen 15 years ago, and somehow he decided that made him more of a son to my father than I'd ever been a daughter. The Asian markets are particularly concerning, he said, pointing to a downward trending line. Our presence there has been stagnant for the past 5 years. No expansion, no new partnerships. Just the same old contracts Dad established decades ago. I had to bite back a smile at that. Robert had always been so focused on what he could see, what was right in front of him. He never bothered to look deeper, to question what might be happening beneath the surface. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to Maya, my assistant. Time to move forward. Start the sequence. Her response was immediate. Everything's in place. They won't know what hit them. I tucked my phone away and returned my attention to Robert's presentation. He was in full stride now, outlining his vision for the company's future. More aggressive expansion, leveraged buyouts of smaller competitors, a complete restructuring of senior management. The board needs to face facts, he said, finally winding down. Chen Manufacturing needs a strong hand at the helm. Someone who understands modern business practices. Someone who can take us into the future. He paused for effect. Someone like me. The room was silent for a moment. Then Thomas Wong, the longest-serving board member and my father's oldest friend, cleared his throat. That's quite a presentation, Robert. Very ambitious. He turned to me. Alice, would you like to respond? I stood slowly, smoothing my skirt. Actually, I have a presentation of my own. If you'll all direct your attention to your tablets. Robert frowned. He hadn't noticed the devices being placed at each seat during his speech. This isn't on the agenda. Oh, but it is, I interrupted smoothly. In fact, it's been on my agenda for quite some time. As the board members picked up their tablets, screens lit up with documents I'd spent years preparing. Contracts, financial records, partnership agreements, all carefully organized and annotated. What you're looking at, I explained, is the result of a decade-long expansion into the Asian market. Not through flashy acquisitions or hostile takeovers, but through carefully cultivated relationships and strategic partnerships. I walked to the front of the room, clicking through the documents on the main screen. While Robert was focused on our public contracts, I was building something much more valuable. A network of small but vital manufacturing partnerships across Asia. Companies that, as of this morning, are now wholly owned subsidiaries of Chen Manufacturing. Robert's face had gone pale. That's impossible. I oversee all acquisitions. All public acquisitions, I corrected. But these weren't acquisitions in the traditional sense. Each partnership was structured as a joint venture through a series of holding companies. Companies that, until today, appeared completely independent of Chen Manufacturing. I pulled up a map showing our new network, dozens of points of light spreading across Asia, all connected back to us. Together, these partnerships represent an additional $300 million in annual revenue. Revenue that's been quietly growing for years while you were busy planning your takeover. The board members were scrolling through their tablets, murmuring as they realized the scope of what they were seeing. Robert stood frozen, his perfect presentation forgotten. But Your father, he stammered. He never mentioned. My father, I said quietly, taught me that the loudest person in the room isn't always the strongest. He taught me to build carefully, patiently, and most importantly, to always plan for the future. I clicked to the next slide, revealing a photo that made Robert's face go from pale to gray. It was from 10 years ago, my father and me in Singapore, signing the first of many partnership agreements. Dad didn't just know about this strategy, I continued. He helped me develop it. While you were busy trying to impress him with quarterly reports and PowerPoint presentations, he and I were laying the groundwork for Chen Manufacturing's real future. Robert's hands were shaking as he flipped through the documents on his tablet. These contracts, they can't be legal. The board never approved. Actually, Thomas Wong interrupted. We did. Those joint ventures were presented individually over the years, each one appearing relatively minor on its own. The board approved every single one. He smiled at me, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. Rather brilliant strategy, wouldn't you say? I pulled up another document on the main screen, a summary of our new market position. With these partnerships now fully integrated, Chen Manufacturing isn't just a player in the Asian market. We're a dominant force. Our production capacity has tripled, our supply chain efficiency has increased by 200%, and our market penetration in key regions has grown exponentially. The board members were leaning forward now, fully engaged. Even those who had seemed sympathetic to Robert earlier were looking at the numbers with newfound interest. But the costs, Robert protested weakly. The leverage required for this kind of expansion is minimal. I cut in, switching to the financial slides. Each partnership was structured through profit-sharing agreements and gradual equity acquisition. We never had to take on significant debt or dilute our existing shares. In fact, I highlighted a particular figure that made several board members gasp. We're sitting on more cash reserves now than at any point in company history. Robert slumped back in his chair, his carefully crafted takeover plan crumbling before his eyes. But I wasn't done yet. There's one more thing, I said, nodding to Maya, who had quietly entered the room. She began distributing new folders to each board member. These are the details of a new joint venture, one that will transform Chen Manufacturing from a regional powerhouse into a global leader. As the board members opened their folders, Robert tried one last desperate play. You can't just spring this on us. There are procedures, protocols. Actually, Thomas interjected again. This proposal was submitted through proper channels 3 months ago. You signed off on it yourself, Robert. Though I suspect you didn't read past the first page, since it appeared to be a minor equipment upgrade for our Kuala Lumpur facility. I pulled up the complete proposal on the main screen. What looked like a simple modernization project is actually the cornerstone of a partnership with Takashi Industries in Japan. They've been looking for a manufacturing partner with our exact capabilities and network. The room erupted in murmurs as the implications sank in. Takashi Industries was one of the largest technology manufacturers in Asia. A partnership with them would put us in a whole new league. The deal is ready to close, I continued. All we need is board approval. And since the preliminary work was already approved 3 months ago, I let the sentence hang, enjoying the look of dawning horror on Robert's face. He had finally realized that while he'd been plotting his takeover, I'd been executing a plan 10 years in the making. Every minor decision he'd dismissed, every small partnership he'd ignored, every routine approval he'd signed off on without reading. They had all been pieces of a much larger puzzle. I moved to approve the Takashi partnership, Thomas announced formally. Second, came another voice, then another. Around the table, hands raised in support. Robert watched helplessly as his dreams of controlling Chen Manufacturing disappeared with each vote. But there was one more surprise waiting for him. One final item, I said, as Maya distributed a last set of documents, a complete audit of all executive decisions and financial transactions for the past 5 years. Robert's face went from red to white in an instant. I knew why. Buried in those transactions were numerous examples of his attempts to position himself for this takeover. Unauthorized expenses, manipulated reports, even a few instances of outright fraud. The board should review these carefully, I said, my voice steel beneath silk. I believe you'll find some interesting patterns that require immediate attention. The aftermath was exactly what I'd anticipated. As the board members dug through the audit results, Robert's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. Every questionable decision, every manipulated report, every hidden expense came to light. Extraordinary, Thomas said, reviewing the evidence in a special board session the next day. He'd been preparing for this takeover attempt for years, siphoning resources, manipulating project budgets, and documenting all of it himself, I added, pulling up more records on the screen. He was so confident in his success that he kept detailed records of everything, probably planned to clean it all up once he took control. The board's decision was unanimous. Robert was terminated immediately, his company shares placed in escrow pending a full investigation. He was escorted from the building that afternoon, his box of belongings clutched to his chest like a shield. I watched from my office window as he loaded his things into his BMW. My phone buzzed. A text from Karen, my sister. Is it true? Did Robert really try to steal the company? I've been dreading this conversation. Karen and I had always been close, despite her husband's attempts to drive a wedge between us. I called her immediately. Yes, I said when she answered. I'm so sorry, Karen. I have proof of everything. The line was quiet for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, she laughed. You know what's funny? I've suspected something like this for years. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the mysterious business trips. I thought he was having an affair. Are you okay? I asked, concerned about how she was taking all this. Honestly, I'm relieved. I filed for divorce last week. Found out he's been hiding money in offshore accounts. I guess now I know why. I smiled, thinking of one more surprise I had in store. About those offshore accounts, you might want to have your lawyer call me. I have some information that could be useful. Because while Robert had thought he was being clever with his hidden accounts, he'd never realized that his offshore banking activities had crossed paths with my Asian business network. Every transaction, every hidden transfer had been noted, documented, and added to my evidence file. The next few months were transformative for Chen Manufacturing. The Takashi partnership exceeded all expectations, opening up new markets and opportunities we hadn't even anticipated. Our stock price soared as the business media picked up on our overnight expansion into Asia. Karen, armed with the offshore banking information I provided, won a decisive victory in her divorce settlement. She joined the company as our new head of international relations, her natural diplomatic skills proving invaluable in managing our growing network of partnerships. One evening, about 6 months after Robert's departure, I was working late in my office when Thomas stopped by. Your father would be proud, he said, settling into a chair. He always said you had a gift for seeing the bigger picture. I glanced at the photo on my desk, Dad and me in Singapore, both of us grinning at the camera. He taught me well. Success isn't about being the loudest or the most aggressive, he used to say. It's about being the most prepared. Thomas nodded. You know, Robert never understood why James spent so much time teaching you about the business. He used to complain about it in board meetings, said it was a waste of time. I laughed. Robert saw what he wanted to see, a dutiful daughter learning the family business to please her father. He never realized Dad was training his successor. And now look at us. Thomas gestured to the city lights visible through my office window. Chen Manufacturing is stronger than ever. Your father built something remarkable, but you've taken it to heights he only dreamed of. I thought about the decade I'd spent building our Asian network. The countless nights spent poring over contracts, the long flights to remote factories, the patient cultivation of relationships that Robert had dismissed as minor partnerships. We're not done yet, I said, pulling up a new presentation on my computer. Take a look at this. Thomas leaned forward, his eyes widening as he saw the plans. South America. You're already thinking about expansion? I've been thinking about it for 3 years, I corrected, showing him the groundwork I'd already laid. Those equipment upgrades we approved last quarter, they weren't just for efficiency. As I outlined the next phase of Chen Manufacturing's growth, I could almost hear Dad's voice. Always be 3 steps ahead, Alice. Let them think they know your plan, while you're actually playing a completely different game. The company Robert had tried to steal was already gone, transformed into something larger and more powerful than he could have imagined. His attempted takeover hadn't just failed, it had accelerated our evolution into a truly global enterprise. Karen stopped by later that evening, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a familiar glint in her eye. "The Singapore office just called," she said, settling into a chair. "They found something interesting." I smiled, reaching for a fresh notepad. Some people thought business was about aggressive takeovers and dramatic power plays. But Dad had taught me the truth. Real success was built quietly, patiently, one careful step at a time. Robert had wanted to be a CEO. I was focused on building a legacy, and this was just the beginning. The next morning, as I prepared for another board meeting, I found a note Dad had left in his old desk drawer. "Remember, Alice, the best moves are the ones they never see coming. Not because you hid them, but because they weren't paying attention." I pinned it to my bulletin board right next to our latest market projections. Chen Manufacturing wasn't just surviving. We were thriving, growing in ways Robert had never imagined possible. Because while he'd been plotting a hostile takeover, I'd been building something far more powerful, a future that would honor my father's legacy while taking us beyond anything he could have dreamed. That's the thing about true vision. It doesn't need to announce itself. It simply unfolds one careful step at a time until suddenly everyone looks up and realizes the game changed while they weren't watching. And by then, it's too late to do anything but stand back and watch it happen.